friends, welcome back to my channel, Relocate with Kaya. I am Kaya and I provide online support for families, individuals, and employees moving abroad. I provide them with relocation, country specific resources. And on my channel, I share my own personal journey of moving from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to Johannesburg, South Africa. Excuse me, with my husband, Rich, and our beautiful daughter, Nina. And today we wanted just to have a conversation as to why we think, and there's been some studies and statistics of why Americans don't move abroad. And we just wanted to share our own personal challenges in the hopes of helping other families and couples that may have come to an impasse deciding whether or not this is something that they would like to do. So the first thing that Rich and I had to figure out is, getting Rich on board, getting your spouse on board. Um, Prior to this move, Rich and I had lived in Southern California for about 6 years, but that was pretty much it. It was, for Rich, it was Philly and Southern California, and for me, it was a few additional places because my childhood was a bit nomadic. So I lived in a few different places, but for the most part, it was Philly and our brief stay in San Diego. But that was pretty much the extent of it. So um, thinking of moving abroad wasn't even a thought. We had traveled, to a few countries, which was nice and lovely, but it wasn't something that we had thought about, discussed, or even considered until 2020, the summer of 2020. As terrible as it was definitely an awakening for me personally. So the thought of moving outside of the country was not even a conversation. I don't know how you felt about that or what. Yeah, like because we never talked about it.
No, because prior to 2020, that really wasn't even on the radar. I mean, like you said, years ago we lived in Southern California. We were back at home. Like both of our families were in the area near Philly, and we were kind of settled there. I mean, we had occasionally toyed around with the idea of like, oh, maybe move somewhere else within the states, but it was never, like a serious conversation. We never, you know, planned any of that out.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, it wasn't until 2020 happened. I mean, everything that was going on in the country during that time, on top of the pandemic, the opportunity not to be on that daily hamster wheel, really kind of gave time to think and reflect on, hey, everything that's going on, the way we were living life, do we still have to live life that way? Like, do you have to get in the car at whatever in the morning, go into the office all day, come back, barely, hurry up and eat dinner, hang out for a half hour? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you have to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, broader was the whole pandemic thing. Like, no one had ever, like, that was just new to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the whole concept of like, oh, you do this grind, until retirement and then you get to live life
Mm-hmm.
really just was not fitting
Mm-hmm.
anymore. So there
Mm-hmm.
was quite a few things that weren't kind of congruent to the way I and you wanted to keep living our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of like the inspiration for it all, the
Mm-hmm.
consideration of like making it a big change and kind of doing something while you can,
Right.
while you're still young instead of waiting. Like so.
Exactly. Like, because that, just as Americans, that's not what you are indoctrinated into thinking that, um, oh, there's other places that may offer an alternative lifestyle that may be, I dare say, better. You you're led to believe that America is as good as it's going to get. So why on earth would you leave? And I think that has a lot to do with why Americans don't consider leaving America because you've been told that you're living in the greatest country on earth. And there's some, positives to, living in America. But for the most part, my own personal view is that you can live a more fulfilled, peaceful life abroad. when you're not on the hamster wheel, when you're not, grinding and told that, once you achieve X, then you'll feel fulfilled. And what you learn is that once you achieve the American dream of, meeting your special person, getting married, having kids, buying a house, um, car, dog, all that stuff. Like once you attain those things, then you're good. Um, and I think once you open your mind to the possibility that there may be something different, it leads to other things, to other revelations. So, Rich and I definitely had all those things like on paper. It's like, what do you guys have to complain about? You've attained what America says that, you should attain, and you should be happy, you should be good. You go on vacations, you're able to live a comfortable life and give your daughter, a good life. So why on earth would you consider disrupting this and doing something different? So, yeah, so that's just a little bit of kind of how we were raised and what our, that was kind of, um, that's just how you exist in America. It's just like you don't go anywhere because you're living in the best country in the world, and you have everything you need, so you're good. And because of 2020, the summer 2020, what happened with the Floyd, um, the George Floyd situation, and how America supposedly had its racial reckoning, um, it it led to me, just thinking that there has to be something better for Black people. Like there just has to be, like we can't continue to operate in a system in a country that has so little value, for our lives. And it just with the way in which this man was killed, and it just, seeing images of it on a loop, and then there were other, instances, that were happening during this time, and you just felt like you were just being, bombarded with death of Black people. And I think because not that these things hadn't been happening this the entire time, but I think there was just such a hyper focus on it that you could not pay attention and not be aware. So, it gets into your psyche, and for me, it definitely was. I never felt, so disconnected and alone and vulnerable living in America than I did that summer. And there were very difficult days and mornings, in conversations that Rich and I would have, and I would just say, to him that I cannot continue to live like this, and I don't want Nina to live like this. I don't want her to experience this. So we have to do something different. Like I wanted to be in community, and at that time, it was just like I just wanted to go anywhere where Black people were the majority, and that's just the truth of it. Like that at that time felt like that was going to be the safest space for me and Nina. So yeah, so that's, and I don't want to speak for you, but I don't know if because things were just so tense, that it wasn't difficult for you to open your mind to the idea of going someplace else. And this was even before we decided to move out of the country. The thought of just leaving our settled, environment and home, um, you know, just, I don't know how you came to the conclusion, like, okay, well, we could, we'll do something different.
Well, that's settled is an interesting choice of words because like the 2020 start of 2020 start of the pandemic and all that up to when we actually moved, there was a feeling of it not being settled, of things being unsettled.
Mm-hmm.
So that is also an underlying factor to all this. Um, in addition to all the horrific things that have been going on, George Floyd and everything, the outside of that was the all the protests, people in the streets. Like you're finally like, you know what? People are waking up. People are sick. Like maybe this is going to be the thing that has changed. Things moving forward, and then it stopped, or the perceived energy around it, the like it just seemed that things levers were shifted and stuff that whole what you thought was a wave of change just sort of dissipated, and then since then it's like nothing's been accomplished. From stuff written in the laws to the general vibe in societies that people have been either forced or just sort of reverted to that previous status quo, which was the word disappointing. I think is an understatement. It really doesn't capture like what the feeling of loss was coming out of that. So that's another huge factor, in addition to finding you know greener pastures elsewhere. Not saying you just jump over the fence because it looks greener. I mean,
Right.
there's obviously a lot that goes into making a move like this, but that's kind of part of the thought process and the feeling of being back in the States before we moved here.
Yeah. No. Yeah. No, I don't think so. So like I said, initially the thought process was not to move out of the country. It was just to move to
Another state.
another state. That, like I said, was at that time I just wanted to be in community with other Black people. So we had considered moving to Atlanta, because we were, it's the Black Mecca of America. And at that time, like we had, you know, we were talking to real estate agents. We were, going to go look at homes and schools. Pretty much the process that we ended up uh, transferring to our search to move to South Africa. So we were going to do all the things. And then politically, we just started seeing what was happening in Atlanta. Um, and that it just felt like, unfortunately, like things were, moving backwards, like rights were being taken away from Black people in Atlanta. So I'm just like, well, this isn't the direction that I wanted to move in. So after Atlanta was no longer a consideration, then I started doing a little research into maybe doing some of the islands, some of the Virgin Islands. And for me personally, I didn't think that living on an island would be. I personally thought I would probably get a little bored, and I realized more and more that I'm definitely a city person. So it just would not have been a good fit. So the islands were scratched off, and then next I had just started doing a little, because there was conversation, like because 2020 was just so crazy. There had been a lot of rumblings of Black people just saying that we're getting out of here, we're getting out of this country. And at that time, there was a lot of attention focused on Ghana. So of course, naturally, I started doing some research into Ghana being a possibility. Um, and the more and more I looked into that, I did not think that that would be a good fit for us, at least at that time. So and again, Google is your friend. I Googled, what is the most progressive country on the continent, and sure enough, South Africa came up. So once I mentioned that to Rich, I don't know, please share what your thoughts. Well, just moving to Africa as a whole, what was because we went from Atlanta to Africa. So I don't know how you were able to make that transition, but you did seamlessly, or maybe it wasn't seamless and you just didn't share it with me.
Yeah, well, it didn't happen overnight. I mean, the switch or the idea might have happened overnight, but us actually moving and planning that didn't happen overnight. Like obviously, moving within the states versus out of the states is a huge difference. I've been somewhat familiar with Georgia and Atlanta, not at all familiar with South Africa. So that was like one of the challenging things for me is that we had never visited the continent, we had never been down here, so it's kind of like, oh, well, what I can't even picture what that looks like.
Hmm.
But once we did visit a couple times, and it was obviously the second time was more of a scouting mission, but it was easier to kind of wrap my head around like, okay, how do we put everything in place? Like, how do we make it happen?
Hmm.
But initially, I'm like, I don't know anything about it. I need to learn more. For me,
Hmm.
it's being there, or it's doing, it's experiencing. That's kind of how I take information in versus just
Reading about
yeah.
it, or
So
watching videos.
so yeah, after I was here a couple times, obviously more comfortable with the idea.
But what was your initial thought, or what did you know about South Africa? Like I know what I know what I knew. Like what was your concern? Like was race a concern? Because I feel like that's the elephant in the room. Like was that something that you were concerned about?
Not on a deep level. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, I knew I'd be moving to a predominantly black country, but growing up in Philly, and that wasn't something I was like adverse to or hadn't experienced. Being the minority in an area, given school or neighborhood or whatever. So that wasn't too big of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
My main concerns were coming from a place that I had lived the majority of my life, knew all the ins and outs, and then
Mm-hmm.
coming here and not knowing anything about it. So I had to figure that kind of stuff out because you
Mm-hmm.
hear, oh, it's great or it's bad. Like, well, what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? Same thing with Philly. Oh, it's so bad. Oh, but it's
Mm-hmm.
great. So it's kind of like, yeah,
Yeah.
everyone can have each experience in a given city. Like,
Right. It's
like
perspective.
things exist, but it's how you navigate
Mm-hmm.
each given areas. There's good and bad wherever you go. So my
Mm-hmm.
concern overall is like not having that like lay of the land, like not knowing like, oh, okay, this, everything right off the bat. So it was more apprehension about like just going to a complete strange place
Mm-hmm.
versus, worries about like being a white person in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Look at that. No, that I didn't. Well, yeah, like I mean, I definitely know you growing up in Philly. I'm sure prepared you for just being not a part of the majority. And I think because you're just you and you're not trying to do anything other than be yourself. I feel like you're able to acclimate into you know different environments. So that's good. I didn't know that was so little of a concern. So that's good. Um, yeah, and I guess the last thing that was a bit of a challenge for us is the whole family dynamics. I think a lot of people um, don't move abroad because they're close relationships to parents, siblings, or even children. So that I know comes up for a lot of people. And if I, speak for myself personally, because I had a bit of a nomadic childhood, moving to different places wasn't too much of it wasn't an issue. Like pretty much anywhere that I moved, as long as I can form relationships with the people in those areas, I usually tend to do very well. So the thought of moving away from things that are familiar to me wasn't a huge hurdle for me. And I don't have super duper close family relationships that had that much of an impact on whether or not if moving would be the right thing, or um, what would that look like moving so far away without having extended family for resources. So for me, it wasn't too much of a hurdle to get past. But when you're not doing this alone, you have to think about each other. And I had to acknowledge that that was not Rich's experience, and that I had to be patient and considerate and thoughtful of him processing moving away from his parents and his family.
Yeah, no, that's true. So like
I don't
it's
know
kind of
what that looked
no, I
like.
don't know. Like it's kind of it's kind of mentioned like everyone's individual dynamic is different. Um, you know, we're fortunate that while folks have expressed like we don't want you to go,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't stand in front of the car on the way to the airport. Like they were ultimately
Supportive.
aware of what it meant to us to move, and were supportive of that, even though at the same time they're
They
like, hey,
weren't rooting.
we don't want you
Yeah,
to go.
right.
So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, you're.
so yeah, so I had to work through stuff like I do. on some level feel guilty about being so far away, like in case, things happen, you're not there.
Hmm.
Ultimately, moving here for us and Nina, like our immediate family,
Hmm.
like the good outweighed, the bad
Yes.
of everything else. So,
Yeah, no, your family, they were amazing. Like they weren't, yeah, they could have easily guilted you into staying. And, but they were very supportive. They weren't, rolling out the red carpet for us to leave, but they were definitely very supportive. And I think that made it easier. I don't want to speak for you, but like you said, I think it
mhm.
made it easier for you to make that move. And then also technology is huge. Like
Oh,
we do WhatsApp, with family and friends. And I
yeah.
think that also has helped a lot, particularly with Nina,
Mhm.
and just still maintaining that connection with family, and her being able to see them and, just know that they are, they haven't completely disappeared. So I think that has been helpful. So I think
Yeah.
for people that are struggling with the idea of moving away from family and friends, technology is also your friend. And I think just know that for people that may, you know, um, question your motives and, and all those things, I do believe it definitely comes from a place of love and concern, but you just let them know that that you are you're capable. You would never do anything to jeopardize yourself or your family, and that just reassure them that you understand what you're doing, and hopefully they will respect that and eventually come around to supporting your decision or growing to support your decision. But those pretty much were, the most challenging conversations that Rich and I had. Obviously logistics is a whole nother, the actual how tos, are a completely separate conversation. But as far as like how did we even get to the point of, you know, considering doing this gigantic move, these were, conversations that we had. And I think a lot of people, a lot of Americans, those are the holdups, whether or not your spouse is going to be on board, whether or not you guys can agree on a destination, and how your family is going to respond or react. So this was just our you know how we work through those things. I hope they were helpful to you. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And I also want to say thank you to the people that have recently subscribed. I'm so happy that this is you know people are curious or interested in anything that I have to say or that we have to say. I'm definitely humbled by that. So thanks for watching, and we will definitely see you soon. Have a great day.